Greetings and welcome to Voting 101. I'm Karen Bickham, the president of North San Diego County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and today the North San Diego County Alumni Chapter and the Collegiate Chapter Upsilon Omega, Cal State San Marcos, are collaborating with the League of Women Voters, North County, San Diego, to present a most informative webinar of Voting 101. And I'd like to note that the League of Women Voters is a Delta community service partner. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, under the leadership of International President Elsie Cook Holmes, is a private, not-for-profit public service organizations whose purpose is to provide assistance and support through established programs in local communities throughout the world. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority was founded on January 13, 1913, by 22 courageous, trailblazing young ladies who were students at Howard University, Washington, D.C., who wanted to make a difference and address the issues and injustices, including the fundamental right to vote. So on March 3rd, 1913, the newly founded sorority, Delta Sigma Theta, participated in the women's suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. This was one of the first social action public service events of the sorority. This was an act of bravery at a time of race and gender discrimination and the threat of violence against those challenging the status quo at the times. Delta had to have special permission to leave the campus and were escorted by the members of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity. However, the founding Deltas were not deterred, but steadfast and tenacious to purpose, which was to march in the women's suffrage parade for the right of all women to vote. Their participation brought more attention to the cause. Delta Sigma Theta today has more than 1,000 plus collegiate and alumni chapters throughout the United States, Canada, Tokyo, Okinawa, Japan, Germany, the Virgin Islands, Bermuda, the Bahamas, Jamaica, West Africa, Southern Africa, England, United Arab Emirates, and the Republic of Korea. North San Diego County, located in the Far West region under the leadership of Kimberly M. Usher and the collegiate leader, Radija Ajabadi, is one of those 1,000 plus chapters. And our chapter was chartered on April the 20th, 2013, with a focus to serve the communities in the North San Diego County. And we have, under our guidance is our Delta's 5-point programmatic thrust: economic development, educational development, international awareness and involvement, physical and mental health, and political awareness, involvement, and social action. 111 years after the founding of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, Delta chapters throughout the world continue to serve our communities. I will add at this time that under Delta's political awareness and involvement and social action thrust, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated is an organization that is nonpartisan. Delta's role, and thus the role of its chapters, is to inform, engage, and mobilize the communities by educating citizens and voters so that they are prepared and ready to exercise their constitutional right and privilege to have their voices heard through the power of their vote. At this time, I would like to introduce our panelists for today's Voting 101 webinar. We have Mandy Butler, who is the chair of Pros and Cons with the League of Women Voters, North County, San Diego. We have Rosette Garcia, who is the immediate past president and the chair of Voting Services for the League of Women Voters, North County, San Diego. We have Renee Tarver, who's the Social Action Chair of North San Diego County Alumni Chapter, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. We have Yetunde Adebayo, who's the president of the Collegiate Chapter, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated at Cal State San Marco, Upsilon Omega. And I also want to acknowledge her, one of the advisors, Dakia Edwards. She's also a member of North San Diego County Alumni Chapter, and she is the Far West Region, Southern California area representative for social action. So at this time, I will turn the webinar over to our panelist.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Yetunde Adebayo, and I am the president of the Upsilon Omega chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. My chapter was chartered April 30th, 2023 at Cal State San Marcos, and we are so happy to be here today. I will just be reading this disclaimer on the screen. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated is a nonpartisan organization. All information provided is meant to inform voters of initiatives and not to persuade others to vote for one way or the other.
Thank you, Yetunde. Again, I'm Rosette Garcia. Thank you so much for that informative background about Delta Sigma Theta, Karen, and welcome to all of you who are here today. Right here you see on your screen our agenda for the day. We've gotten through the welcome and introductions. Yay, we're past that. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you all about voting. Why should we vote? Who votes? Then my colleague Mandy Butler will cover propositions, many of the propositions that are on the ballot that you're going to see when you receive your ballot soon. We'll provide you with some important information and some resources that you can use if you want more information. And then we'll end with Q&A, questions and answers. As we go along, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A that are, you'll find the Q&A button. If you're on a laptop, it's down at the bottom of your screen. And put your questions and comments in there whenever the questions or the comments come to you. Don't need to wait till the end. So moving on to our next slide. Just a quick couple of comments about the League of Women Voters. We are over 100-year-old organization founded in 1920 when women finally got the right to vote in our country. Our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. And we do that through encouraging active and informed public participation in government at all levels. And we also work to increase the understanding of major public policy issues. We envision a democracy where everyone has the desire, the right, the confidence, and the knowledge to participate in civic life. And we, just like Delta Sigma Authority, are strictly nonpartisan. We never support or endorse any candidate, elected official, or political party. And today, we will be presenting information about voting, voting rights, and about propositions on the ballot in a neutral from a neutral standpoint, just to give you the information so that you're armed with knowledge when you go to vote. One last thing about the League, although our name is League of Women Voters, we are a membership organization, and we, even though our name is League of Women Voters, we are open to anybody who shares our values and wants to support us and become a member. So I'm going to start with what we're calling as a pop quiz, just to sort of engage our audience. And the question here is, when were 18-year-olds given the right to vote? Was it A, 1865, B, 1920, C, 1971, D, 1985? And if you want to, you can put your answer in the, I think it's in the Q&A. I'm not sure that the chat is activated for this webinar. But just curious, or maybe you think that 18-year-olds have always had the right to vote. That's not an option. but you could put your answers in the chat. I think it looks like we have the chat activated. People in the audience seem to know the answer to this. Yes, you are correct. The answer is C, 1971, when young Americans in this country actually came out in big numbers because it was during the Vietnam War, and young men, mostly men, were being drafted and being sent to war, but they didn't have the right to vote. At that time, the voting age was 21. So we're kind of wanting you to know that 18-year-olds didn't always have the right to vote, but also to kind of remind you about what happens when groups of people come out and make their voices heard. Things can change. So on to the next slide. Just a little discussion about why vote, because we often hear, and you probably do too, people say, why should I vote? My vote doesn't really matter. And we just want to remind everybody that we live in a country, in a nation that is whose system of government is a democracy, and voting is the foundation of democracy. In a democracy, we grant people have the power to make decisions about their government, and we do that through electing people to represent us. So it's important for us to vote because it helps us maintain a strong and healthy democracy. It holds our elected officials, it says they're politicians, holds them accountable, because when we vote, we can re-elect elected officials who we think are doing a good job, and we can vote out of office people who we don't think are representing us in the way we want to be represented. It's an opportunity for change by changing who the people are that are sitting in the halls of Congress or in our state legislature. And it's your right. So we just always try to remind people that it's your right to vote, and we should exercise. Why would you not exercise a right that you have? So just to sort of summarize there, it's your voice, it's your right, voting is your power. And Karen mentioned that in her opening comments. We do these presentations in the community, oftentimes in high schools and colleges. And this is one of our slides that we use all the time. And we point to John Lewis, who was, in our mind, just an incredible leader, a 17-term congressman from Georgia, and a civil rights activist who was protesting in the 60s during the civil rights movement. And he risked his life. He served time in jail, all fighting for the rights, voting rights, in particular for Black Americans in the South, whose rights were being oppressed and suppressed. And he has actually a more famous quote about good trouble, getting into good trouble, but we like to quote him when he said, your vote is precious, almost sacred. And we agree with John Lewis, and it's the League of Women Voters was founded with the idea of promoting, supporting, protecting, and expanding voting rights. And so we just find John Lewis to be a hero, and we always kind of start our presentations pointing to him. Next slide. So again, this is a true or another sort of pop quiz, but maybe it's an easy one. True or false, it doesn't really matter if I vote because my one vote won't make a difference. And yes, for all the people, we agree it's false. But we'd really like to explain to you and also arm you with knowledge when you're out there talking to people about why this statement is false and what you could say to them. And right here, you'll see on a slide, we have two examples of local elections in North County. They were school district races where the margin of victory was very narrow. In one election, and in Vista, it was a 10 vote difference, and in Fallbrook, it was a 14 vote difference. And we have situations all the time in what are called down ballot races, local races, where the vote margins are very slim, and where your vote really does make a difference. And these local races for these local elections are for school board, city council, county board of supervisors, and these elected officials, I think if you move on to the next slide, are the people who have the biggest impact on your life. They're the people that are making decisions. They're the ones who are closest to you, your city council, your county board of supervisors. They're making decisions about, how often and how costly it is to have your trash collected, what kind of firefighting capabilities you have in your community, what your roads look like, what your parks look like, if you have parks, your schools. And so these are important elections, and your vote really matters, in particular in these local elections. But even in the big elections, the reason your vote matters is because politicians are responding to the people who vote. And if they win, or if a proposition, for example, wins by 80% versus 51%, there's a message in that. So even if you feel like my vote doesn't matter because it's gonna be on the winning side or on the losing side, your vote will send a message to the elected officials about how the public really feels about an issue. So this is some information that we've been sharing recently about who votes, because we find it really fascinating. And you'll see on this bar graph, this was in the 2020 election, which was a huge turnout election, that the 18 to 24-year-olds showed up at about 50%. So half of them showed up and half of them didn't. And as you go up in the age ranges, the voter turnout gets higher and higher. And this particular slide we showed to our young voters when we're on college campuses and high schools, because we want to congratulate them for showing up at a 51% rate, because it was the biggest increase from one election to the next that had ever been seen. But it was a huge increase because in past elections, that age group shows up generally in the 30 to 40% range. About a third or a little bit more than a third of those voters show up. And next slide. And so we want to sort of point that out, and also understand, and this is another pop quiz, that there are reasons why young people may not show up at the same rate as older people. And we also want to make the point that it's the people who are showing up at the very high rates who are really deciding elections, and who politicians are listening to, because they know who's voting. But on this slide, you'll see a question about, what do you think is the biggest barrier causing many young voters not to vote? Is it A, lack of voting experience? Is it because of frequent moves and the changes of address? Is it fewer resources and unpredictable work schedule, targeted efforts to suppress the youth vote, or E, a feeling of disenchantment and frustration? And I see a lot of people in the chat putting in letter E, somebody putting in A or E. I'll wait another minute to see if anybody has any other responses. So on this question, there is no wrong answer. Surveys, studies that have been done to try to figure out what can be done to improve the voter turnout in young voters have found that all of these are reasons that young people give for why they don't vote. So we understand that these things can be hard for young people. We want you to know that in California, we don't really have a problem with suppressing the youth vote. But we understand the feeling of disenchantment and frustration. But next slide. This is something that's really exciting to us. There are an estimated 53 million young people under 30 eligible to vote in this upcoming election. That's a big number, 53 million. 8 million of whom are newly eligible and would be able to vote for the first time. And so we're just really excited about this. We just want everybody to understand, but especially young voters, to understand how much power they have, and how much change could actually occur if young people showed up at the same rate as people my age. And we're just hoping that this information about 53 million young people and 8 million new young voters is really exciting, and we hope that it energizes you to get you and your friends out to vote. So so again, you can use either the chat to respond to some of these questions, but if you have questions, there should be a Q&A button down at the bottom. And if you have questions on any of the presentation, please feel free to put your questions in whenever you have them. So again, every vote matters. Your vote is your voice, and through voting, people can make their collective voice strong enough to make democracy listen. Vote and make your voice heard. Next slide. So just a little bit about voting. The ballots will be mailed by your local registrar of voters about a month before the election. So around October 5th, they'll start being mailed out. They're expected to start arriving in mailboxes around the 7th. They'll be mailed to all active registered voters. And it's important for your registration to be up to date with regards to the address, because that's where your ballot will go. The deadline to register to vote is October 21st. But even though we have this registration deadline in the state of California, you can continue to register to vote past the deadline. I'll explain that in a minute, and even vote if you've missed the deadline to register. We have in-person voting at select vote centers and at the ROV, the Registrar of Voters, from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. And then the weekend before the election through election day, all of the vote centers are open, as well as the ROV. And on the last day to vote, November 5th, the vote centers are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. The Secretary of State, and we echo what she says, Shirley Weber, their slogan is, in California, there are more days and more ways to vote, because you can start voting from the minute that you get your ballot in the mail all the way up until the last day to vote, which is November 5th, election day. So true or false? If I miss the deadline to register to vote, which is October 1st in this election, I'll have to wait until the next election to vote. Is that true or false? If you aren't registered in time, you won't be able to vote. And the answer to that is false, because in the state of California, so October 1st is the last day to vote, either by mailing in a paper ballot or registering to vote, not a paper ballot, a paper registration form, or registering online, because you can register to vote online. October 21st is the last day that you can do that. If you miss that deadline, you can go to the Registrar of Voters office between the 21st and the 26th. And then on the 26th, actually, and register to vote in person. And then beginning on the 26th, you can actually register and vote at the same time at any one of the vote centers or the Registrar of Voters. So you can register to vote and you can cast a ballot. It will be called a provisional ballot, and it will be set aside until they determine that your eligibility, they've determined your eligibility and that everything is okay, and then your vote will be counted. So we have this official deadline, but you can still register and vote after that deadline. Next slide. So re-register if you've moved, re-register if your name has changed, re-register if you'd like to update your signature, because that is the way that the registrar of voters verifies that the person who's voting, you have to sign the outside of the envelope if you're mailing your ballot back in, or when you go to vote in person, you sign there. They will match that signature with your voter registration signature. And if for some reason you've changed your signature or something, you should re-register and update your signature. And if you want to change your party affiliation. There's no penalty for re-registering. If you re-register and you really didn't need to, it's not a problem. So if in doubt, re-register. That's what the registrar of voters tells us. Next slide. I'm not going to read through this, but I'm just going to keep this up for a minute. In the state of California, we have a voter Bill of Rights. And just so that you know, these are some of your rights. Like, you can still vote if you're standing in line and the polls close. And you can cast a secret ballot and all the other things that are there. But I want to point out that we like to say there is no reason, so does the Secretary of State, there is no reason to stand in line because on election day and the polls close on you, because you've had so many opportunities before that to vote, to cast your ballot. You can, vote by mail, you can drop off your ballot at a drop box, and you can vote on many days before the last day to vote, November 5th.
Yes, once again, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated is a nonpartisan organization. All information provided is just simply meant to inform voters of initiatives and to not persuade people to vote one way or the other. Thank you all so much.
And that goes along with what we, with the League of Women Voters, we are not here to influence your vote. We are going to show you both what we call the pros and the cons of the different propositions on the ballot. And before I get started doing that, I first want to explain what a proposition is and how propositions get on the ballot. And so a proposition is a piece of legislation, proposed legislation, that has to be approved or rejected by voters. These are called measures or propositions. And if passed, a proposition can do several things. A proposition might be able to change the Constitution of California. It might be able to authorize a bond issue, which we'll talk about later, or it can change laws that are presently enacted in the state, or even reject laws. Now, there's two ways propositions get on the ballot. First of all, the state legislature, so we have a Senate and an Assembly, they can make laws, but sometimes when they make a law, that law still has to be approved by the voters. And this happens when they want to change the Constitution, or if they want to change a law that was enacted by a previous proposition, or if they want to issue a bond. So the state legislature, even though it can make laws on its own without our approval, for some things, they do need to have the voters approve it. But what's really interesting is that California is one of 26 states that has a process by which citizens can get propositions on the ballot. And this is a really interesting process. It allows citizens to put a proposition on the ballot without any support from the legislature or the governor. And this happens, what happens when a group of citizens get together and want to propose a proposition, they have to collect signatures, somewhere between 500,000 to 900,000 signatures, depending upon what the proposition wants to do. And they have to go and collect these signatures and then submit the proposition and the signatures to the Secretary of State. and then they hope that they go through the approval process and get it on the ballot. So really interesting process that we have here in California. So just to give you an idea of what's on the ballot this year. So right now on our ballot is, hold on a second. I just did something that I didn't want to do, sorry. Just a second. No. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of did something. Okay. So there are 10 different propositions on the ballot right now. And 5 of these are what we call the legislatively referred proposition. And you can see here, those have single digits. 3 of them, Proposition 3, Proposition 5, and Proposition 6, will change the Constitution of California. 2 of them will issue bonds. And then there are 5 of these citizen initiatives, which were put on the ballot by citizens and will change laws. They won't change the Constitution, but they will change laws. And these are, we'll be talking about, I'm probably not going to have time to cover all of them, but I'm hoping that we get to at least go through a fair number of them. Okay, so we're going to start with one of the propositions. And before we get to the proposition, what I'd like to do is ask you a question, and it relates to the proposition. And I'd like everyone to put in the chat what they think the right answer is. So first of all, what does the California Constitution say about marriage? Do you think it says that marriage is between a man and a woman? Marriage is between consenting adults? Or does our California Constitution not say anything? Does it leave it to the federal government to make laws about that marriage? So if you could just put your answer in the chat, and we'll see what people think. And Rosette, maybe you could monitor that, or I can do it too.
Oh, Renee can too.
Oh, okay.
Or Yatunde.
So it's kind of a mixed, I can actually see it. Okay. It's kind of a mixed answer. Some people think it's A, and some people think it's B. So why don't we move to the next slide? And so what is the situation? Well, it turns out that in 2008, another citizen initiative was put on the ballot, and that citizen initiative was called Proposition 8, called for changing the Constitution. So in our California Constitution, it defined marriage as between one man and one woman. Now, Proposition 8 was basically invalidated by the Supreme Court in 2015, which basically, said that same-sex marriages, it required all states to grant same-sex marriages and recognize same-sex marriages in the United States. So basically, this proposition or this language that's in our California Constitution is not legal. And thus, Prop 8 is what we call now a zombie law. It really has been superseded by federal law. And so what this proposition, if you go to the next slide, Rosette, if we look at what the proposition is called, it's Proposition 3 is the number. It's called the constitutional right to marriage. And it asks the question, should the state repeal the constitutional provision that's present now that limits marriage to a man and a woman? And if we go to the next slide, if it passes, if a majority of voters says yes to this proposition, the state constitution will be changed. And the phrase only marriage between a man and a woman is valid or recognized in California will be removed, and it will be replaced by the phrase the right to marry is a fundamental right. I want to mention here that these propositions, all these propositions that we're voting on, a simple majority, so that's 50% plus 1. If 50% plus 1 approves, votes yes, that proposition is approved. So with every proposition, and we'll be seeing this as we go through them, after the propositions are submitted to the Secretary of State, people are asked, or groups are asked, to come up with arguments for or against the proposition. And different groups will come out in support of these propositions or in opposition. So on the left of this slide, you can see who's come out in support of the proposition. So I'll just let you read those groups. There's a lot of different groups. I'm just showing you some of them. And their arguments are that banning same-sex marriage is unconstitutional, and that although marriage equality is currently the law in the United States, this may not remain the case because courts change. So they're saying that everyone's right to marriage should be enshrined in the state constitution. And with going along with this, what's really interesting is just like political campaigns. I don't know about you, but I'm getting tons of texts from different political candidates. And there's a lot of, you probably read how much money is put into political campaigns. Well, same thing happens with the propositions. There's a lot of advertising done. You may be getting some of these texts or see ads on TV in support or opposing these propositions, and that costs money. So people also donate money to either support or oppose the proposition. And on each of these slides, I'm going to show you how much money has been raised so far. In this case, the supporters of Prop 3 have raised about $3 million, again, primarily for advertising to get people to vote in favor of it. On the next slide, we actually have some people opposing this proposition. You can see them on the left. They say it's unnecessary because federal law says, same-sex marriage is legal. They claim it would override all laws on marriage and that it would remove protections against child marriages, incest, and polygamy. Now, at this point, I'm going to make a kind of a disclaimer. So we get these arguments from the arguments that were submitted to the Secretary of State. The League of Women Voters cannot validate all of these different arguments. So we just show you what's been submitted. Some of these are based on fact, but some of these arguments are really opinion. And that's kind of something that you have to tease out as you read through the different arguments in favor and against these propositions. In the case of this proposition, no money has been raised to oppose by opponents of the proposition. So in this case, voting, so if you vote yes on this proposition, you think that the language of our California Constitution should be changed to match federal law. If you vote no, you're against changing the language. Was there anything in the chat, or should I move forward? Okay, then we could go to the next slide. So again, this relates to the next proposition. So where do you think most of the money to renovate or build new California public schools comes from? Is it income taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, bonds? Where do you think it comes from? And the answer to this is actually D. A lot of money for salaries, for programs does come from income taxes and sales tax, but it turns out for building or renovating, most of the money comes from bonds. And I'm just going to show very quick this slide, which just explains that in order to pay for new construction or renovating K through 12 schools and community colleges, the state doesn't have a set funding stream. What has to happen is it has to issue these, what we call bonds, to pay for this. And the state will issue a bond, and then they will use that money to pay for about 50 to 60% of new construction and renovations for K through 12 schools. What happens then, the local school districts have to raise their own funds to pay for the other 50 to 40%. And that happens by issuing local bonds. But let's talk first now, what is a bond? So bonds are a type of long-term borrowing that the state uses to raise money for various purposes, often some kind of long-term construction purpose, something like that. And basically what happens is they'll sell bonds to investors and they'll pay back the investors over time with interest. So people might buy a 30-year bond, knowing that over 30 years, they'll get some of the principal back and some interest. It's a form of savings for investors, really. And the state uses this a lot to raise money. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, but they do use this for, especially in this case, the construction of schools. Now, if we go to the next slide, so this proposition, this is proposition 2. So I did 3 first, now 2. It will authorize bonds for public school and community college facilities. And the question is, should the state authorize $10 billion in bonds to build new or renovate existing public schools and community colleges? And before we look at this, I just want to mention that in 2016, California voters approved Proposition 51, which issued $9 billion. Now, I'm not saying million, $9 billion in bonds for improvement of public schools and community colleges. But that money is all spent. And the state tried to issue more bonds, about $15 billion in 2020, but only 47% of California voters voted in favor of it. So the last time a bond for community colleges and schools was put on the ballot, it didn't pass. So the legislature is trying again to raise money to help, renovate and upgrade schools. And I should mention at this point that one of the reasons the legislature is doing this is, right now in the state, California has about 10,000 K-12 schools and about 115 community colleges. And a lot of these are in very poor shape with leaking roofs, broken air conditioning, peeling paint, and other health and safety hazards. And in fact, the Public Policy Institute of California found that 38% of California students attend schools that don't meet the minimum safety standards. And so it's become a real issue. And the fact that the other bond didn't pass in 2020 was probably part of that problem.
Mandy,
and I don't know how many of you went to schools where you felt that it could have used some renovating or upgrades.
Mandy, may I interrupt you for a brief second?
Sure.
So in the chat, there is a question if we can give a overview of all of the propositions and then coming back for a more in-depth analysis, just like an overview of everything.
Oh, sure. Let me finish this one and we'll do that. Okay. So if Prop 2 passes, the state will issue $10 billion in bonds to be allocated as follows. And you can see most of the money, $4 billion will go to renovation and $3.3 billion will go to new construction. And about $1.5 billion will go to community colleges. So if we can go to the next slide. Now, one thing to realize with bonds, they have to be paid back. And what happens is the state will have to pay back that $10 billion over 35 years, and it will have to pay the people who bought the bonds about $5 million a year for 35 years to pay back that bond. Go ahead to the next slide, Rosette. And again, like I said, there's always people who come out in support of these and people who come out against. And in this case, you can see who the supporters are. And they say that, again, this proposition will provide funding for outdated facilities needing repairs and upgrades to meet basic health and safety standards. And it will provide strict taxpayer accountability and protect local control. And you can see almost $6 million been raised to help, promote this proposition. The opponents for this proposition say that Prop 2 will raise property taxes, and that is complicated, but it's because local districts will have to issue bonds to match the state funds, and local bonds are paid back with property taxes. They say that Prop 2 is unnecessary because enrollment's declining And they say the state should include school repairs in its regular budget. So if you vote yes on this, you are voting in favor of the state selling $10 billion in bonds for school repairs and upgrades. If you vote no, you're against the sale of those bonds. So if we can go, let's see, Rosette, if we want to just do a quick overview of all of them. I was planning on covering 4 more in depth, but we can stop here and go to slide 77, Rosette.
Is that okay, Karen and Renee? Is that okay to do that, or should we continue as we look?
Do you want, yeah, it's up to you.
I love all the information, but if we're giving the voters enough information to make good, sound decisions, and is it the overview sufficient? That's my
Yeah,
only
the
question.
overview probably isn't, but what I was going to suggest, if we go to page 77, people could take a screenshot of this and just kind of hold on to that until later when we go over it, if you prefer, or we could just keep going.
You did have a comment of from Amina Mozan that she really liked that you're giving all the information. So
Okay,
I'm
well,
looking at the clock. We have like 35 minutes before.
okay. So
Maybe
let
we can pick
I
up the
can
pace.
I
Yeah.
can cover at least 3 or 4 more. I think I've done a lot of the introductory stuff, so I think I can cover the next faster. So let's do these next 3, and we'll. So again, what do you think is the major environmental issue facing California right now? And I'll just let people kind of think about that real for a second. And there's actually, this is kind of an opinion question. What do you think is the most? And I want you all to think about that for a second. And then there's no right answer, really, because many people don't have access to safe drinking water. We know that forest fires are becoming more destructive. We're having more drought, more floods. All of this is happening due to climate change. Climate change is affecting all of these things: farming, water quality, wildlife. But we also have problems with air quality. Exposure to polluted air is linked to a number of health effects, asthma, and even premature death and heart and lung disease. So these are all problems. There isn't really one right answer. So what's happened is that the legislature, again, this is one put on the ballot by the legislature, has put another bond issue on the ballot. And this bond issue, the question is, should voters let the state sell $10 billion in bonds for safe drinking water, wildlife prevention, flood control, and other environmental protection projects? Again, the state has money in its general fund, but it doesn't there's a budget, a little bit, not a lot, little, there's a budget crisis right now. And that's why the legislature is looking for other ways to fund some of these projects. If we go to the next slide, it shows how this money would be spent. So again, it would be $10 billion in bonds. The biggest chunk of it would go to safe drinking water and for drought, flood, and water resilience. So for water programs. Another 1.5 billion would go to wildfire and forest resilience, so trying to prevent fires. The other big chunk would go to coastal resilience programs, so rising sea levels and so on. But also be money for clean air projects, biodiversity protection, and park creation. And one thing I want to mention about this proposition is, in the language of the proposition, it requires that at least 40% of the money goes to projects that aid vulnerable populations or disadvantaged communities. So at least 40, often these are the communities that are hardest hit by environmental disasters. So at least 40% of the money will go to those communities. Next slide, Rosette. So again, just like with the other bond, the state has to pay it back. It will be paid back $400 million a year for 40 years. But by the way, all this financial information comes from an office called the Legislative Analyst Office. They're a nonpartisan group, and they point out that putting money into this now might save money in the future. That would, spending money on some of these initiatives would reduce the risk and the cost of damage from future disasters. So again, people are in support of this. You can see who some of those are. Again, almost 4 million has been raised to support this. A lot of this money has come from environmental groups like the Nature Conservancy, Save the Redwoods, things like that. And these groups say that this will help our state become more resilient to climate change, help us shift from disaster response to disaster prevention, and makes sensible investments. And if we go to the next slide, there are people opposing it. Again, for some of the same reasons as with Prop 2. They say that California has too much bond debt, that the state should pay for these projects from within its general fund, and that they feel that it's too nonspecific. They don't have specific standards for measuring success. So again, with this one, if you vote yes, you would support issuing $10 billion in bonds for these various environmental projects. If you vote no, you would be voting against issuing the bonds. Okay, the next one. So, and I want everyone to actually,
Mandy,
yeah.
before you go on, I see that Jill Cooper has her hand up.
Oh, okay. I can't see that. I don't have the whole, so what is
Yeah.
the question? Let's see.
It just has her hand up. Jill, did you want to, well, do you have the
I
question?
don't see a question in the
Yeah, she needs
chat.
to put her question in the Q&A.
Oh, I don't, oh, that's a mistake, she said. Okay.
Okay.
So I want everyone to actually type an answer into the chat for this one. So which of the following statements about people in California prisons is true? People in prison cannot be forced to work. People in prison can be forced to work and they get paid minimum wage. People in prison can be forced to work and most of them get paid less than $1 an hour. So just type in what you think is the correct answer to this. Oh, a lot of people know the answer to this. It is C. So people in prison can be forced to work and most get paid less than $1 an hour. So if we look at the next slide and look at what this situation is, so the California Constitution bans involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime. The Constitution doesn't define what involuntary servitude means, but it commonly refers to forcing people to work against their will. People in prison and jail can be required to work or do other activities such as taking classes. And if they work, they get paid less than $1 an hour. Some firefighters get paid a little more, but generally they get paid less than $1 an hour. Now, workers can also earn time credits. In other words, they can get time off their sentence. But again, if they refuse to work, they often face consequences such as losing the ability to make regular phone calls. So that's the situation now. So this proposition, which was put on the ballot kind of at the last minute, would remove involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime. So basically, it asks, should the state repeal language prohibiting involuntary servitude except to punish crime and replace it with language prohibiting involuntary servitude in all cases? And if we look at this, so again, it would remove this language, but it would still allow prisons to give people reduced time credits for working. And people in prison could still work and be paid, but it would be their decision. They couldn't be coerced into working. So if we look at the next slide, this one again, what would happen here? Fiscally, so prisons and jails might have to increase pay and thus costs could increase. But by giving more time credits or reduced sentences instead, costs could decrease because people in prison would serve less time. So again, it's kind of a balance. We're not sure what will happen, but again, people in prison could ask for more pay. So supporters of Prop 6, you can see who those supporters are and how much money has been raised in support of this. And they say involuntary servitude is an extension of slavery. Prop 6 prioritizes rehabilitation for incarcerated people, and incarcerated people should be able to choose jobs and shifts that best support their goals. When this was submitted, if we look at the next one, Rosette, the next slide, no official argument was submitted against this proposition. There is one group, this group, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers, has come out against it, but really there hasn't been much public opposition and no money has been raised to oppose this proposition. So again, if you vote yes, you would vote for banning involuntary servitude in all cases in the state of California. If you vote no, you would basically be voting to keep things as they are, the status quo. Okay, let's look at this one. Now, I'm going to mention all of those propositions I just covered were put on the ballot by the legislature. Now we're going to get into some citizen initiatives, propositions that were put on the ballot by citizens, by a group of citizens who got together. So first of all, what is the minimum wage per hour in California? So go ahead, probably a lot of you know this. Oh, actually, this is interesting. There's some different opinions. Okay, well, let's go to the next slide and see what the answer is. So the minimum wage at present, it's $15 an hour, but with the cost of living, it's $16 an hour. So that's what it is at present. But why that question, I think, was probably confusing to some people is because some people, depending upon what your job is, the minimum wage is more than that. So, for example, if you are a fast food worker, you make $20 an hour. And some healthcare workers are making or soon will make $25 an hour. And some cities already have higher minimum wages. San Diego, the minimum wage is $16.85. And in San Francisco, it's $18.07. So it's, there's, depending on where you live, the minimum wage could be different than what the state requires. What happened was the state set $15 an hour, but then with cost of living increases, it's 16. So Proposition 32 asks, should the minimum wage for all workers be increased to $18 an hour by 2026? Businesses would have till then, well, actually, if this is approved, and we can go to the next slide, Rosette, the minimum wage would immediately, so as soon as this is voted on, if it's approved, the minimum wage would immediately go to $17 an hour for the rest of 2024, and then to $18 an hour starting in 2025. The exception would be for businesses with less than 25 employees. They would have till January 26 to enact the wage increase. But if it's approved, immediately the minimum wage would go to $17 an hour. So next slide. What the fiscal impact is, it's hard to say what the tax revenues would be. If people make more, would they have to pay more taxes? There would be an increase in state and local costs because the state, local governments would have to pay people more. And prices might go up a little, although the estimates are that it would be less than 1%. And that businesses might make a little less money because they have to pay people. Now, some people are saying it could reduce the number of jobs. Small businesses might have to cut back on how many people they hire. Next slide. So who's supporting this? I want to just mention here, I have some of the different groups that are supporting it, but the last name there, Jan Sandberg, actually is a private individual who put $10 million into getting this onto the ballot. So I don't have the money there because he put the money in 2002, but he really is the one who really got and spent the money to get this ballot this proposition on the ballot. And the arguments for the people who are supporting this say that this will help working Californians who struggle to make ends meet. The minimum wage has not kept pace with the cost of living, especially in California. And that will improve the economy because people will have more money and they can increase spending on rent, groceries, and other necessities. Again, there are people who are against this, and they say that employers already face increased labor and supply shortages and costs from inflation. And they said, raising the minimum wage increases the state's expenses. And they say that it will cost jobs. As I mentioned before, some businesses may not be able to hire as many people. So again, if you vote yes, you will be voting in favor of raising the minimum wage to $18 an hour everywhere in the state for any job by January 2025. And if you vote no, the minimum wage rules will stay the way they are right now. Okay. So I think this might be the last one I go into depth. How are we doing for time? Can I do this one? Yes? Okay. So here's a question. California is a state with the blank average monthly rent. So which state do you think, are we the highest average monthly rent, or the second highest, the fifth highest? Where do you think we fall? Oh, wow. How does everybody know the answer to all these? I didn't know the answer to this. It's the second highest. Hawaii has the highest average monthly rent, but we are the second highest. So if we look at this proposition is a very interesting one. It basically would call for local governments to be able to impose rent control. And I'm gonna, it says, should voters repeal the Costa-Hawkins Rental House Act of 1995? I'm gonna explain this right now. So let's first look at the explanation. So the situation in California concerning rent control is really complicated. And back in 1995, a law was passed by the legislature called the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. And it allowed local governments to basically impose rent control on existing apartments. So that was 1995. So any apartments that were built before 1995, local governments could impose rent control. They can control how much the rent goes up, each year. However, it prohibited local governments from imposing rent control on single-family homes, condos, and any type of housing built after 1995. So in other words, if you live in an apartment built before 1995, your local town could impose a rent control on those. But any other type of housing, the local government, local cities cannot impose rent control laws. Now, Governor Newsom signed a bill in 2019 limiting annual rent increases to 5%, and this law is in effect till 2030. But again, it only applies to those apartments built between, before 1995. And same with some cities have rent control laws, but again, on apartments built before 1995. So this proposition, and there's been a lot of debate and controversy about this proposition, but what it would do, it would repeal the Costa-Hawkins Act. So cities can control rents on any type of housing. Apartments built after 1995, houses, and condos. And it would prohibit the state from limiting the ability of cities and counties to limit or expand rent control. So basically, they couldn't reenact the Costa-Hawkins law. So basically, we get rid of all these laws. Now, this would have some serious, wide-ranging fiscal impacts. Now, expanded rent control, and again, this is analysis from this legislative analyst's office. Expanded rent control could provide more affordable housing. The value, however, of rental housing could decline because potential landlords wouldn't want to pay as much for those properties. And, landlords pay property taxes on their rental units, but if the value of their properties go down, they'll pay less property taxes. And then they say that fewer homes could be available to rent because landlords would sell their properties rather than rent them, because it wouldn't be as lucrative to rent them, so they would just sell the properties. So, and again, there's other, people are trying to estimate other effects of this. So if we look then at who's supporting this, this is a really interesting one. Again, this is a citizen initiative. And first of all, I wanted you to note how much money has been spent on this one. All the other propositions, if you remember, were in the millions, below 10 million. This one, 33 million has been spent promoting this. And I'll explain why that is in a minute, but obviously the people supporting this are saying rent in California is too high. In many places, people starting careers are spending half of their salaries for rent. Prop 33 will allow local governments to tailor policies that work for their residents. And they say corporate landlords are profiting from the lack of housing supply. And I want to mention here that most of the money for this has come from this first group on the left, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. That is a nonprofit healthcare foundation that provides services to people living with HIV and AIDS. But they have also become big proponents of rental control, rent control. And they've put a lot of money into promoting this proposition. If you go, so they're the ones main force behind this. Now, again, look at how much money has been spent against the proposition. And the people against the proposition say strict rent control policies will make the housing shortage even worse by reducing the construction of new housing. And the rationale here is that if landlords can't charge as much for properties, for renting properties, they're not going to build new ones. And they say California already has laws limiting rent controls, and they say voters have already shot down this proposal twice before. So the group I mentioned, this AIDS Healthcare Foundation, in 2 previous years, I think it was 2020 and 2016, tried to get this law reversed, and they put it on the ballot as a proposition, and people voted against it. So this is the 3rd time they're trying to get these rent control measures enacted via proposition. If you notice, a lot of the money, there's a ton of money been spent on this, and one of the main groups that's putting money into opposing this is the California Apartment Association. So no surprise really there. So it's a very complicated one, but again, if you vote yes on this proposition, you are in favor of inactivating the Costa-Hawkins law and letting cities and governments, local governments, put rent control laws into effect on all types of housing. And if you vote no, you would basically leave things as they are, the status quo. This is a complicated one. Okay, where are we in terms of time? I think I should probably wrap up and just give an overview now. If we go to slide, I think 77. I think it is.
Mandy, I have a question.
Sure.
Do you have an example for Proposition 33? Like, for instance, you're a new college graduate, you've got a job, and so you're living in California. So in light of your vote, can you kind of explain what it means?
Well,
I mean, like, okay.
So, I think individually, just as individuals, it might mean that you would, you could move into some place and not have to worry so much about your rent going up each year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of what you're asking?
With the vote versus yes or no. That's what I was asking.
Oh, okay. So you mean, what does the yes mean versus the no? Or...
Yeah, for like a young college students, yes.
Oh boy, that's a hard question to answer. I mean,
Mandy,
right.
Is this about Costa-Hawkins? Are we still talking about the proposition?
The rental one? Is that what we're talking about?
We're talking about Proposition 33. Yes.
So the one that I just talked about, yeah.
So
Right.
I think it's important to point out that there is no automatic rent controls that are going to happen. All
Right,
this
right.
law does, if it passes, is that it would allow cities and
Right.
counties to consider and then enact rent control if they so desire. So oftentimes, like the arguments against, say, rent control is a bad idea. It may be a bad idea. We're not commenting on that, but rent control isn't a done deal. If you vote yes on it. Right now, cities and counties are prevented from enacting any kind of rent control, except on this limited apartments built before 1995, right? And this proposition, should it pass, would take away that limitation and allow cities and counties to make decisions about that.
And it would depend where you live, what happens, you know, what the local city decides to do. And it would probably take a while because each, you know, even locally, any kind of law has to be passed by the city council. So this isn't something that will affect people immediately. It's going to be a long-term effect. But it would mean, I mean, the legislative analyst's office says that probably rents would be less, you know, they wouldn't increase as much as they have been, and people wouldn't have to move as often. So does that help? Karen? Okay, great. But it's a hard one to predict. You know, with a lot of these, we can't predict exactly what's going to happen. So what I'll just mention real quickly is we can look, so we covered Proposition 2, Proposition 3, and Proposition 4. Proposition 5 is a little complicated. It has to do right now, local bond measures. Like, let's say your town wants to have some kind of construction project, low income housing, affordable housing, and they need to raise a bond issue to fund it. Right now, that bond issue would have to be approved by 67%. So I'm just going to say, let's say you live in San Francisco, and San Francisco wants to have a bond issue that they, offer, just like the state one. They would sell the bonds to investors and pay them back over the time. And they want that bond. They want to build a huge, a big, low, affordable housing complex. That would require 67% of people in San Francisco, voters, to approve it. The legislator says that's too high a number, and they want to lower that number to 55%. So that local bonds, infrastructure projects, don't need this very high threshold of 67%, but instead would make it 55%. School bonds already only have to be approved by 55% of the people. So that one's kind of very picky, but it's one to maybe look at because local communities will be affected by this. The one I want to mention, 36, has gotten a lot of press. This is the one that I don't know, you probably may not have remembered this, but back in 2014, voters passed Prop 47, which reduced property thefts of $950 or less from felonies to misdemeanors. And you're all probably too young to remember that, but it basically reduced, the value of items. What would determine whether if someone stole something, $900, it would be a misdemeanor, not a felony. And it also reduced some drug possession crimes to misdemeanors that used to be felonies. But since then, there has been a small increase in the amount of organized theft. I mean, you've probably all heard these smash and grab kind of incidents. And what happened was a group of lawmakers and district attorneys, law enforcement groups, blamed that on Prop 47, and their work to kind of reverse some of that. It won't reverse all of it, but for example, according to this proposition, if you were accused of a theft 2 times or more with You know, even though the value of the items were less than $950, it would be now a felony. The other thing is it would add fentanyl to the California's list of hard drugs, therefore increasing the penalties for its sale or use. And it would also lengthen sentences for these theft crimes and drug crimes. It would do a lot. There's a lot in here. But what it basically is doing is imposing stricter penalties for drug and theft crimes. And there's been a lot of controversy about this. Which ones did I miss? Oh, 35, another very confusing one that's really hard to go into, but basically 35 was put on the ballot by a group of doctors and hospitals. And it all comes down to the state has a source of revenue from taxing managed health plans. So the state gets money from a certain kind of tax on health plans. And right now that money goes into the general fund, and the legislature and the governor determined how it gets used. A lot of it goes to Medi-Cal, which is the state's version of Medicaid. This group of doctors and clinics wants to be able to tell, they want more of the money to go to reimbursement for them to, they say doctors aren't getting enough money to treat Medi-Cal patients. And a lot of doctors won't see Medi-Cal patients anymore, that the reimbursement isn't enough. So they want to be able to tell the state how to spend that money that comes from this tax. And they have made very specific specifications of how the money would be spent. Right now, normally money that goes into the general fund of the state, the governor and the legislature create a budget and they determine where the money should go. Well, this proposition would say for this particular pool of money, and that's about $7 billion a year, we're going to tell the state how to spend that money. The legislature and the governor aren't. It's a very confusing one. So some of them,
easy to understand, and
it's really hard to understand this one. And again, there's been a lot of money spent advertising this one. And yeah, I know we're running out of time, so I feel like maybe we should move on to the next slides. Are there any questions we can answer quickly in regard to some of these? But we have the League of Women Voters has a great website, which I think Rosette's going to show you, with short synopses of all of these. And I really recommend going there if you're confused, or some of these I couldn't go into as much detail on. Go there and read about them.
Somebody asked if we could have the arrow. Oh, perfect. That's already been removed. And then there was a question earlier about whether or not this recorded presentation will be available for everybody to watch after. And just a last reminder, Rosette, would you mind checking the waiting room to see if anyone is still trying to enter by any chance? Thank you.
Oh, sure. I think they automatically get sent in, but I'm checking. Did I stop sharing by any chance?
No. And why don't you show the links that we have?
Okay, hold on. Now my laptop.
Oh no.
Oh no, here we go.
Okay, I know mine locked up. Okay.
Oh yeah, so there it is.
That slide, yeah, that is a great resource.
So yes, on this slide, Vote 411 is the League website where you can find, actually Easy Voter Guide, Vote 411 will have really good, they're good sources, nonpartisan sources of information for these propositions. And you can find information about candidates there as well. Ballotpedia is another good source. And then the QR code's here, so you can point your camera at it if you want to open up these, get directly to those websites. And the official information, voter information guide, which is published by the Secretary of State, is available online. And I believe on the 26th, just in the last couple of days, the Secretary of State has just started mailing it out. So you will get this pamphlet in your mailbox soon, probably this coming week. And then wanted to sort of close with this quote from Abraham Lincoln, just to remind you all about the importance of voting. Hence, it is not the qualified voters, but the qualified voters who choose to vote that constitute the political power of the state. So your vote is your voice, and it's how you exercise your power. So please vote. And then I'm turning it over to Yetunde to see if there are any. Oh, Yetunde, you go ahead and.
Yeah, no, of course, no problem. I see that Renee has her hand up. I'm not too sure if that was intentional.
Thank you so much. My hand is only up just to remind you that we had those survey questions. That was it.
Oh, you mean at the poll, the survey? Oh, I'm sorry. You were about this in particular. Yes.
Yes.
All
Go
right.
ahead, Yetunde.
So, hello, everybody. These are some survey questions that my chapter recently had the opportunity to engage and collect from people at my school. So this is a combination of questions that we gathered over there with that data, as well as some questions that the League of Women Voters thought would be appropriate for people to just know about. So our first question would be, what are the consequences of leaving certain sections blank on the ballot?
Well, there really are no consequences. You can, you're not required to fill out every single portion of a ballot. The things that the candidates and the propositions that you do vote on will be counted. And the ones that you don't vote on, there will be nothing tallied. So, so vote what you can, vote all of it really, but vote what you can and express your views in that way.
And I'm going to add on to this question, if that's okay. If I am to leave a section blank, is there a way for me to find out what I can vote on after I submit my ballot?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Yetunde.
If I were to submit my ballot with the questions blank, would there be a way for me to change what I put on my ballot and then fill them back in?
No. So no. So if you receive your ballot in the mail, it's a paper ballot, and you're going to fill it out, and then you're going to fold it and put it in the envelope and sign the outside of the envelope and date it before you mail it back in. And once it's submitted, you're done. And that would be the same if you go into a vote center. You're going to submit your ballot, and you can't get your ballot back, and you can't vote again, and just vote the ones that you didn't vote. You get one opportunity to vote. Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. The second question that there is, it says, I am a California resident, but attending school out of state and would like to make a plan to vote. Do you have any advice?
Yes. So in California, I'm going to answer this from 2 points of view. You can actually re-register to vote as a California resident with an out-of-state address, and your ballot will come to you at your college in Colorado or Arizona or wherever it is that you live. Because if if you're temporarily living outside of the state, you just provide them with your new address and your ballot will come to you. If you're a college student and you're out of state and you haven't changed, I mean, this is what I did with my kids. Their ballots would come here, and I would mail them their ballots in school. And because our ballots come about a month in advance of election day, there is plenty of time, right, to receive the ballot, send it on to your children wherever they are, and for them to vote and by mail and mail it back in. If you've just moved here and you're coming to school here in the state of California, and you want to vote here, you don't have to, but you can vote in California, because in California, the minute you move to California and begin living here, you can vote in California. There are no what are called residency requirements. So I don't know what your situation is if you're an out-of-state student going to school in California. The states make their own rules about it. They have their own election rules. Some are stricter than others. So you'd have to figure out what your situation is, what your voting rights are in the state where you are registered to vote. But you could register to vote in California and vote here. I hope wasn't confusing. I hope I answered that question.
I understood. Thank you.
Okay, great.
And for the first survey question, there was actually a comment in the chat stating that voters have about a month to research the questions and decide on how to vote. I believe this is something that I was aware of, but some people may not be aware that they have the time to go in and look up all the propositions. So thank you, Jill Cooper, for your suggestion.
Right.
And
I forgot to say that. We do say that all the time. You know, you receive your ballot and because there are more ways and more days to vote, you can vote at in the comfort of your home in front of your laptop, doing research as you're filling out your ballot. Yeah, it's true. Thanks, Jill.
If there are any other questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A as I asked the last question. I am a former foster youth in transition, and I may be homeless from now till 2025. Can I still vote?
Yes, you can. You can register to vote. If you don't have an address, when you fill out your registration form, you can just provide your sort of physical location, sort of, the intersection. If you're, say, living out of your car, if you're living temporarily with a friend or a family member, you can provide that address, a physical address. And if you don't receive your ballot in the mail, you would just go to a vote center and vote in person. So you don't have to have a home address, in order to register to vote or to vote. And I just want to point out Jill Cooper, who asked that question, and pointed out that information and is attending today, is actually the chair of our Youth Voter Initiative. And she's been spending a lot of time out in North County in high schools and our local colleges, energizing and activating young people to vote. So thanks, Jill, for being here today.
Yes. She also added on in the chat that if this person does have a PO box, a post office box, they can also receive mail there. There is a question in the Q&A forms. Somebody actually mentioned that for the second question, they are also able to get an absentee ballot from California as well. I don't know if that's incorrect or yeah.
Any other questions?
I am looking at the chat and I do not see any more questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yetunde. I think I'll turn it back over to Karen. Mandy, was there anything else? I can turn it back over to Karen if you want to wrap us up and end the webinar.
Well, first of all, I really want to thank the League of Women Voters, North County, San Diego, Rosette Garcia and Mandy Butler for an excellent presentation. We've already had requests for additional webinars and maybe perhaps have a little more time because you have so much interest in the propositions and getting a good understanding. So, be on think about it. And I just want to say thank you to you and Mandy and everyone else who was present, and Yetunde for being here to represent the youth voters at Cal State San Marcos. And I see Renee has her hand up and she would like to add a comment too. Yes.
Well, it really was an excellent presentation. And since we did it in February, we did it. So I knew it was going to be excellent. League of Women Voters has all sorts of information for us. My final question was, and I think somebody asked it earlier, is there going to be an opportunity to look at this webinar another time? I know you're going to post it. Is that correct, Rosette?
Yes. So we have been recording it and we will post it on our, we have a YouTube channel, the League of Women Voters. And when I have that, I will send it, Karen, to you and Renee, and then you can share that link with whoever you need to share it with.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate that. If there are no other questions, and for Mandy or Rosette or any of our panelists, I just want to thank you all for spending your afternoon with us. And it has been very, very much appreciated. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.